Welcome back to your Thursday Buckeye Talk from cleveland.com. It's NFL Draft Day, but we're not talking NFL Draft. We are talking some rapid-fire stuff. We're talking Ohio State transfers because we're in this window where the portal is open and spring football is over at most places, and it's just popping. So there are guys in, there are guys out. By the time you hear this, things may have changed. Guys may have been added to it. We'll try to keep you up to date as best as we can. As we record this late Wednesday afternoon, Doug Lesmerises, Nathan Baird, Stephen Means. Nathan, we have another Buckeye out. Not a shock, but maybe not at the top of the list of guys we thought might be moving on. It's Ben Chrisman on the offensive line. What do we think of that?
Well, as we talked before on the pod, we expected some attrition from the offensive line. Just a lot of scholarships had piled up in that room, and guys who were in their third or fourth years and didn't have an immediate path to starting time, maybe no path to starting time in the long term even, we thought those guys would maybe move. Now, Chrisman was not the first person that we would have guessed on that list, simply because he was with the two deep this spring. In the spring game, he was the second team left guard. He was even getting some snaps with the first team when they rotated Donovan Jackson out. And a year from now, when Donovan Jackson possibly has moved on to the NFL, Matt Jones has definitely moved on. Enoch Vamahi is going into his fifth season, although because of 2020, I guess he could stay for a sixth year. I know, Doug, your favorite topic. But the interior spots are potentially opening up next year. So if he had stuck around and competed for that would have been there at the same time. I totally see someone saying, well, I can go start somewhere right now. Why, at some point, do you have to make a decision? I would rather do that than keep competing for a maybe here at Ohio State. And I understand that.
At the very least, this clears up the Ben Chrisman, Bennett Christian issue at Ohio State, which maybe is only a podcast issue. So
I think it was only a Doug
Lesmerises
issue.
The names, it's the same name. It's very, very simple. You're just defensive because you have some named Bennett, and you're like, well, hey, because you could be a Bet. Your Bennett is a Bennett and a Ben, is he not?
No one has called him Ben yet. We'll see. I'm kind of going to let him feel that out. We'll let that happen organically.
Well, he's a baby, so you can call him whatever you want to call him.
Exactly.
Is he talking yet? Does he talk yet? What does he do? Does he talk?
He says a lot of da da da, ma ma ma. Here's the most heartbreaking thing I can say about this kid. When he, if you show him a mirror, or if you give him a phone and flip the camera so that his face shows up, he says da 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 because he thinks he looks like me. I know it's just,
oh my gosh,
it tears your soul apart.
Does he have a beard? He doesn't have a beard, does he?
Not yet. Baby. No.
Not yet. So we'll get him on the pod soon. If he can talk, he should have a podcast.
Once he can talk.
So
yeah.
Ben Chrisman, this is one of those, Stephen, where I was sort of mentioning this about Bama the other day. It's like, hey, you lose a guy. He hasn't really played. What are you going to do? But a year from now, right, this could be one of those things. But again, if you're with the twos, and if we said right now, well, who's your backup left guard? It's like, well, I assume they'd figure something out, but it might be a young guy now, all of a sudden. Not that it's going to come back and bite him, Stephen, but it's possible that a year from now, when we're looking at the interior of the Ohio State offensive line, if Donovan Jackson goes pro and Ben Chrisman is starting somewhere, that we think to ourselves, oh, no, that guy would actually be useful at Ohio State still, which is how this works, but he might have had a future here.
Yeah, I could definitely see this one coming to bite them back in the butt. This is a former top 130 recruit. He was actually one of the more vocal members of that 21 class early on and helping to put it together. So a little shocked by this one. I think some of this is Matthew Jones is still here way longer than what maybe you thought Matthew Jones would still be here, look like back when he signed in 2018. Some of this is Ben Chrisman not developed maybe at the level he wanted to get on the field, but if you didn't get this sixth year that these guys are getting at this point, and this 18 class wasn't still playing college football, maybe Ben Chrisman would have had an opportunity to maybe win a job this year as an interior guy opposite of Donovan Jackson there. So that's some of this. Is there's still some older guys here taking up some spots, but also just it's going to look real funky maybe a year over the next couple of years when Ohio State's offensive line is going to probably be featuring a bunch of second-year guys that maybe have to play a year earlier than they want to because bad recruiting has put them in this position, but it's also bad recruiting is forcing some other guys out who you maybe be relying on as veterans later down the line.
By the way, I think I caught a Ben Christian in there. No,
Chrisman?
Not just me. It's
I said Ben Chrisman.
You called him Ben Christian. I thought I saw a little bit of an Ian, more than a man at the end. I'm just saying, This is clearing this up. It's clearing it up. It's eliminating an issue. I'm not so sure that Ryan Day and Mark Pantoni didn't bring Bennett Christian and Ben Chrisman into a room and be like, one leaves the room. You guys figure it out. One stays, one goes.
Well, they're the ones who caused the problem. I also will say, I'm going to say right now, mark it down. Someone refers to Bennett Chrisman before the end of the 2023 season.
Mm-hmm. I thought you could say before the end of this podcast, before the end of like this sentence. So, is it the number one thing? No, that there's two guys with similar names. It's not the number one thing. On the other hand, Ben Chrisman, he's the number 124 overall recruit in the 247 composite in the class of 2021. Carson Hinsman is the number 177 overall recruit in the class of 2022. And Carson Hinsman appeared to seize a job this offseason. So, yes, there are guys back, but also there were jobs to be seized. And if Ben Chrisman had seized something, maybe they would have said, okay, well, Matthew Jones is going to move to center because Ben Chrisman is one of our best five, right? So it's one of those things, there was some opportunity there. It also, this is what happens when you give guys 6 years. So he is out. I think it remains on the list of, as we think about this stuff, and I sent this out to the texters, we're in a world where Colorado has lost 50 guys in the portal in the last, since September. Texas A&M's lost 30. Bama's lost in the 20s. LSU's lost in the 20s. Ohio State's lost 8 or 9. So and most of them are not guys that you felt the impact. Best of luck to them. J.K. Johnson's down at LSU. LSU looked good in their spring game. J.K. Johnson's down at LSU. They brought in, I think, 2 or 3 transfers in the secondary. He's in the 2 deep, so he might play for them, right? But it didn't devastate Ohio State, especially because they brought Davis and Igmanosin in. Then you look at Taraji Mitchell and Jalen. By the way, J.K. Johnson and Jalen Johnson, they got that sorted out too. Both those guys left. Jalen Johnson, Mason Arnold, Caleb Burton. It's not devastating the team. We'll see what happens with Ben Chrisman. Guys coming in. Best of luck to him. Hope he finds a good home. Lorenzo Styles and Tywone Malone, Nathan, apparently visiting Ohio State this weekend. Would both of these guys make sense for Ohio State? Lorenzo Styles, the older brother of Sonny Styles, was the receiver who caught the first. Was he not the receiver who caught the first pass last year for Notre Dame in the game? The 50-yard pass on the missed tackle. Older brother making the transition from receiver to defensive back and transferring. So he's changing positions and then changing schools. He's from here. His brother plays here. It would make a lot of sense if Ohio State's interested. If he's coming in, they're at least somewhat interested. And then Tywone Malone is a guy who was a top 100 national recruit at defensive tackle that Ohio State was interested in. They didn't make his top 6 in the end. He's also a baseball player. He went to Ole Miss. I don't know, Nathan. These are 2 interesting names that doesn't mean they're going to get them or they're going to choose here. But you could see how they could make sense.
In both cases, yeah, I think I could see how they could make sense. And as you said, they're both guys that Ohio State could have landed under different circumstances. They were certainly interested in Lorenzo Styles Jr. to some extent as a cornerback coming out of high school. They were definitely interested in Malone at his proper position, the defensive tackle. And he's the one that I think would fit the most immediate need for 2023 because they're just thin on bodies on the defensive line interior. And Ryan Day was talking about this after the spring game, that it's not that they don't think they don't have a talent problem on the defensive interior. It's just thin. It's I mean, we could name them pretty quick, right? It's Ty Hamilton and Tyleik Williams and Mike Hall Jr. and Hero Kanu and Jaden McKenzie, and that's it, right? It's 5 guys, and they like to rotate there. And if you start losing guys, something happens. Even just one guy, it really thins that out. So and you want to be able to practice too, I guess, throughout a season. So I think they need another body there. It's just it's a weird one because it's not the most immediate positional need for whether the team wins a game in 2023, but it seems like such a structural need. And the good thing about Malone is, I mean, he's a guy who was number 55, I think, in that class. Just a very highly ranked guy that they were in on for a long time, and is somebody who would then have a longer the upside there, that maybe next year he would be a starter for you or something like that. We'll see how he develops. And then with Styles, it's just, I don't think this secondary can, even now, some of the advancements we've seen, I don't think they necessarily want to be turning down guys who have that kind of upside. I'm curious how quickly he could make the transition to be a corner that could help Ohio State. As I pointed out in a couple of texts, and I haven't talked to him or the Styles family about this, it's just some sort of thing I'm pointing out that we see just in his history. He played as a true freshman at Notre Dame, so he hasn't used a redshirt season yet. That would obviously be something that they could employ this year. If he needed a year to transition to corner and then could be a bigger factor in 2024-25, that would be at their disposal.
So Tywone Malone fits this bill, Stephen, that we're on alert for, right? Planting seeds.
Mm-hmm.
You recruit a guy, it doesn't work out. That recruitment on that defensive line, they got Tyleik Williams in that class of 2021 at defensive tackle. He was the number 16. Tyleik was the number 166 player in the 247 composite. Tywone Malone was the number 63 player.
Mm-hmm.
That, I don't know that was necessarily for one spot, but they kind of happened around the same time as each other. But there's some other guys that have been on this list. There's the one guy who went to Texas A&M on the defensive line. I can't remember what his name was. He left. Yeah, he left, but he didn't come here.
Correct.
There's just been like some other guys where it's like, oh, the thing. But this would maybe one of those. Maybe be one of those, Stephen, that Larry Johnson put in some work here. Is he a Jersey kid?
He's
a Jersey kid.
Catholic.
Wound up at Ole Miss, and
Davison
this could be one of those where you plant a seed, and now here we are, and maybe you bear the fruit.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier Ohio State didn't make his top six. A lot of that is because he wanted to play baseball as well. Believe it or not, at 6'4", 305 pounds, he also wanted to play baseball. And I don't know many Big Ten schools that are going to let you do that. I mean, Ohio State didn't. They thought about it with Justin Fields, but it actually didn't happen. And maybe some of that was COVID, but that's part of why they didn't make it. So this is a perfect example. I think another good one would be Trey Sermon at Oklahoma when he went in the portal. His previous relationship with Tony Alford during the recruiting trail is what led to him coming to Ohio State. Another situation like that. And I do think this is semi-important. Actually, a little bit more than semi-important, because Nathan listed 5 guys, but there's only 3 of those guys we're sure about. And that's Hall, Hamilton, and then to a lesser degree, maybe Williams. They, at bare minimum, probably need a 4th guy that they know they can count on to get some type of rotation in there, and Tywone Malone would fit that. While I agree with everything that Nathan said about Styles, it's a cool story because dad played here, his brother's already here, and the transition, but there's going to be some transition there. So it's more of a for the future thing than it is something we think about right now. But Tywone Malone, that would be a pretty big get for. We're talking about they want to have depth at defensive tackle. Well, they're one of those guys getting abducted by aliens away from that actually being a problem right now.
I don't know if this matters, but Ohio State actually has changed baseball coaches since Tywone Malone's recruitment. So I don't know. Maybe Ryan. Listen, here's the thing.
Highly doubtful.
They have the same football coach.
Well, yeah. The answer is still no to him playing baseball.
Well, no, but it's what you. I mean, this is Keith Byers talked about this. Keith Byers thought he was going to come and play baseball at Ohio State, and then he was like going to go play baseball in the spring. And Earl Bruce was like, "You can play baseball in the spring. You'll just be 6th string when you come back in the fall, but you can go play baseball." Keith Byers was like, "What are you talking about?" It's like, "No, you're fine. Go play baseball. Just be ready to be the water boy when you're back in football, because everybody else is going to be playing football this spring." So, but you can tell the guy the thing to get him to come. I don't know.
So they did with JT. They let him even go take pictures in the basketball jersey and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And we saw how that went.
So we'll see. I mean, there's going to be some stuff popping. And again, listen, man, and they're going to be here with the San Diego State guy that we talked about on the previous pod, the offensive lineman. Like, they're looking. Everybody's looking. So keep your eyes peeled. And the next time we have a podcast, we'll probably be talking about it more. Again, Nathan, tell us again, the window to enter the portal ends Saturday. Is that right?
April 30th. April 30th. Is 15 days. It opened on the day of the spring game. So you have to be in by April 30th. You don't have to have committed to Ohio State by April 30th in order to end up coming here. So that's the important thing to remember. Just because when April 30th comes and there's still guys out there, this happened in the winter too. It doesn't. The deadline is only important for entering. It's not important for exiting.
Okay, so that's Sunday. So next week we'll be talking about this more. Maybe there'll be some more news popping. All right, we're here to do rapid fire. We're going to start with Emeka Egbuka, and we'll see how many other questions we get through. We'll do that next on Buckeye Talk. All right, here we go. More from our tech subscribers. Love the tech subscribers, 614-350-3315. Like transfer information. It's interesting stuff to get in your phone. Ding, your phone, you set a little setting. And then when Buckeye Talk sends you a text, maybe it goes buzz, maybe it plays a little song, ding, and then you get all the news. You don't have to go look for it. You're going about your day, you're living your life, you're at work, you're on the treadmill, you're with your friends, with your family, and do you want a little ding in your life? A little ding, a little bit of Ohio State news analysis, ding, maybe.
We get that
2-week free trial. Probably not after that. I think I ruined it. I think now it's like, no, that was annoying. I don't want that. Emeka Egbuka. From the 419, is Emeka Egbuka the most underrated receiver or player in college football this season? He was the number one receiver recruit coming out of high school, and in his second season, first time really playing, he had 74 catches, 1,151 yards, and 10 touchdowns. Those are all American numbers, and I'm not sure many realize he's that good. I listened to the College Football Survivor show, thank you, and both guys traded him away like Ohio State doesn't really need him. We did. That Shahad and I both traded Emeka Egbuka on our mega trades, if contenders could make mega trades podcast, because they have no tackles. That's why. It's no offense. Shahan traded him to Notre Dame for Joe Alt, who's like the best tackle in college football. Like it's like a nod to Emeka Egbuka, and it's a nod to the rest of the room. It is not that anyone's saying, this is Emeka Egbuka, they don't need him. It's like, well, they do have Marvin. Do you see a tackle? Do you see? So we're getting All-American tackles in our trades for Emeka Egbuka. But I understand what the person's saying. I assume he's a first-round talent, and I know he gets lost because Ohio State has Marv. But can you make the argument that he's the second-best receiver in the country? Maybe. And even then, I think his talent is being underrated. It's Marvin this, Marvin that, which is totally understandable. But Emeka is the real deal, too. I don't know. What do you think? From the 419. Steven, I don't know. What do you think? Is Emeka Egbuka maybe the most underrated player in the sport?
I don't know if I'll go that far, but he's probably in the top 5. This is what happens when 5-star players who were the number one wide receiver in their recruiting class play with generational talents. You kind of forget about them. And I actually wrote something similar to that before the Georgia game of how important he actually was, because Marvin is Marvin, but what makes Ohio State's passing game so special is when it's that second guy who's just as good, really just as productive. I won't say just as good, because he had 3 less catches and a little over 100 less yards and 2 less total touchdowns when you add in those jet sweep touchdowns that Emeka Egbuka had last year. He's going to be just as productive this year. They're going to end up being the first garnering somebody gets abducted by aliens, because we've been here with Jackson before. They're going to be the first 2 players in Ohio State history to have multiple 1,000-yard seasons. And that's not a small accomplishment for a school who, up until Paris Campbell, they only had like 3 or 4 or 5 total. And now it's just what happens here. Your top 2 guys just get 1,000 yards. Garrett and Chris probably would have done it had 2020 been normal. And then Jackson, obviously, he not gotten hurt. But that's a pretty big deal that Emeka Egbuka and Marvin Harrison are doing that. So, yeah, I do think he's a little bit underrated, mostly because it's not just what he does as a receiver. It's the way they can use him at times in the run game. As like Ryan Day said it, Deebo Samuel. They can do some Deebo Samuel stuff with him while Marvin Harrison Jr. is what he is. And that's a special thing to have when you're trying to find guys who are unique and how you can use them in this offense. Emeka's got multiple different ways that you can get the ball in his hands and he can make something happen.
Nathan, do you think if we were doing an underrated list, he'd be in contention for something like this? Do we not talk about him enough?
Yeah, and I think, not to quibble with words, although that's what we do. I mean, is he underrated or is he just overshadowed? It's kind of to the point that Steven's getting at, that when you play with someone who is just what Marvin Harrison Jr. is, that he casts a long, big shadow that it can be easy to get lost in. And so I think that's a little bit of it. At the same time, though, like looking at those numbers again, I went back and I looked at our All-America tracker, and there's like a dozen different teams here, and some of them only do a first team. Some of them don't include a lot of teams. He was honorable mention on one All-America team of like the major teams last year, and that was PFF, which should tell you something that he could be, because they're going to recognize things to a certain level. They're going to, they're going to be looking for the ratings and traits that show up. So I think he probably is not known by enough people throughout college football, but I don't think it's again, I think a lot of it is, though, because Marvin Harrison Jr. is just it is a very distracting thing to have on your field every Saturday, that it's sometimes easy to forget about the other guys that are out there.
One more thing. I also think he's just been out of sight, out of mind, because he hasn't been a participant. So, like, if everybody would have been healthy,
he was out this spring. Yeah.
If he'd have been healthy, let's be real. As much as people wanted to talk about Jaden Ballard after that pro day, it should have been Marvin Harrison Jr., Julian Fleming, Emeka Egbuka, Xavier Johnson, and Cade Stover catching passes from them. But two of those guys aren't out. If that's not the case, it's, oh, look at Marvin Harrison Jr., maybe the first non-quarterback taken, and Emeka Egbuka, another first rounder in this draft, because I think PFF did put out their best returning guys in certain positions, and they had Emeka second. So I do think it's a combination of Marv is Marv, but also it's kind of hard to talk about a guy if he's not doing anything and kind of not in your hemisphere at the moment.
Also, Emeka Egbuka showed up with a really cool name that he is now trying to make famous. Marvin Harrison Jr. showed up with a famous name. Those things help too.
That's true.
So that's true. I have two stats to drop on you guys. One is, and I was looking this up for the College Football Survivor show, where the Thursday show, if you guys want to go listen to it, we talked about Colorado, we talked about Oregon State, and we talked about Washington. And in the course of doing that, I checked, and there were 18 Power 5 receivers last year who had 1,000 receiving yards. 11 of them are gone to the NFL draft. Only 7 of them are back. And I guess this is not weirdly. This is 6 of those 7 guys were duos, which is like kind of crazy. So it's Marvin Harrison Jr. and Emeka Egbuka. It's Rome Odunze at Washington and Jalen McMillan at Washington, which is why I was looking it up, because Michael Penix flung it all over the place. It was Dorian Singer at Arizona, who now transferred to USC, and Jacob Cowing, who's still there, and Malik Neighbors at LSU. So those are the 7 guys who were Power 5 1,000-yard receivers last year who are back this year. It's only 7. So that's pretty good. Also, keep your eye on Washington. Like, Washington's going to chuck it around, and Ohio State's going to chuck it around, and those are all really good receivers. I also did this from our old friends at PFF. I looked at the receiving grade, not the overall offensive grade, just the receiving grade. Because who cares if you can block? That's for coaches. We're podcasters. We just want you to catch the ball.
Don't tell Urban Meyer that.
No, I know. Does he have a podcast? Does he have a podcast? No. He probably does. I don't know. I haven't listened to it if he does. But when you're on a podcast, who has a wide receiver blocking podcast? And we're back on Buckeye Talk. We're going to talk about the 10 best blocking wide receivers in the country. We're not doing it. The 10 best receiving grades in the Ryan Day era, starting with 2017 when Ryan Day takes over as offensive coordinator. I'm going to read you the list. You guys want to guess? You want to play a game? How do you want to do this? I got the top 10 receiving grades by PFF. Do you guys want to just play the game? You guys, we like games on Buckeye Talk. We'll play the game. We'll see how many we can get. So it's player and year. It's player and year, okay? You know what I'm saying? So, Steven, we'll start with you. We'll see how many of the 10 that we can get before you guys get buzzed. And, of course, you guys play along at home. Get your list together in your head at home. You're getting it together. You're getting it together. Steven, go ahead.
Jackson Smith-Njigba, 21. I think he might be number 1, too.
That's number 1. It's a 91.9 grade. It's pretty good. Nathan.
Garrett Wilson, 2021.
Garrett Wilson, 2021 is 6th with an 84.5. Pretty good. Steven, go ahead.
Garrett Wilson, 2020
is 8th with an 82.9. Nathan, go ahead.
Chris Olave, 2021.
Chris Olave, 2021 is 10th with a 79.9. 10th. Chris Olave, 2021 barely makes it. There's a layup here if anybody wants to make a layup. You guys don't like layups?
No. I think, we wanted to think about this. We think it too hard. Marv last year.
Marv last year
1,000.
is second with an 89.9. So Jackson's actually ahead of him just based on the receiving grade. So Marv last year is number 2, 89.9. Nathan, go ahead.
Well, I'm starting to wonder if the whole point of this exercise is that Emeka Egbuka is supposed to be on this list. So I'll say Emeka Egbuka 2022.
Who knows? Can you really say? Couldn't it go either way? That's the mystery of this. What point am I making? Am I making no point? Are we just playing a game?
I think the point might be that he's not on the list because that's how good the receiving has been. Because I think, well, you can answer and say if Emeka was right. Because if not, my next guess is Paris Campbell, 2018.
Emeka is 7th. So Emeka's grade last year is an 83.7. He is 7th on that list. So there was a point to this game that, hey, it's 7th, but also it's on the list. Like, it's really good. You say Paris Campbell 2018, Steven, that's a great guess. That's 3rd. That's an 87.6 for Paris Campbell in 2018. Nathan Baird, you're up. 3 more. You guys have gotten 7 so far. 3 more.
Chris Olave, 2020.
Correct. That's 5th. He's 5th in 2020 with an 84.8. Very good. Steven, you're up.
Oh, I can't even believe I didn't think it. Chris Olave, 2019, because he had 12 touchdowns that year, I'm pretty sure.
86.6. It's 4th. Yeah. Chris Olave's highest grade was in 2019. Chris Olave is 86.6 in 2019, 84.8 in 2020, and 79.9 in 2021. So he kind of receded kind of a little. Well, he's still excellent. And then he went to the NFL and tore it up. So there's one more spot. It's number 9 on this list, Nathan. Can you make it perfect? Can you guys get them all?
Can you tell me what was the first year again? Like, when does this start?
2017 is the first year.
I'm gonna take a shot. It's probably wrong. I'm gonna say just on volume, I'll say KJ Hill 2018.
That's it. You guys did it. 10 for 10. You didn't even cover the team in 2018, Nathan. That is a clutch grab. 81.7. So again, in order, Jackson Smith and Jigba 2021, Marvin Harrison 2022, Paris Campbell 2018, Chris Olave 19, Chris Olave 20, Garrett 21, Emeka 22, Garrett 20, KJ to the MF Hill 18, Olave 21. So if we're talking about Emeka, who's ahead of him? Jackson Smith and Jigba, Marvin Harrison, Paris Campbell, Chris Olave, Garrett Wilson. First rounder, second rounder, first rounder, and you're 7th. So yeah, you're overshadowed, you're underrated, you're all of those things. But you know what you are? You're a guy who belongs on the list. You're a guy who belongs in that mix. And I think this could be one of those. This is kind of what the Ohio State cornerback group went through for a little bit. It's like, okay, well, are you Denzel Ward? Well, you don't have to be Denzel Ward. Well, you're Marshawn Lattimore. It's like, you don't have to be Marshawn Lattimore. Let's expand it to the whole secondary. Are you Malik Hooker? You don't have to be Malik Hooker. Bradley Roby's pretty good, though. Garyon Conley's pretty good, though, right? Like, so is Emeka Egbuka, Marvin Harrison, or Garrett Wilson, or Chris Olave? Maybe not, but he might be a first-round pick next year. So it's hard to do. The one thing that I think has happened is Chris, Garrett, and Jackson were not like were separated enough that they could sort of establish their identities separately. So Chris was Chris before Garrett got here. Mm-hmm. Then Garrett got here. It's like, okay, now it's Chris and Garrett. Then it was Chris and Garrett and Jackson. Emeka is lumped with Marv. Emeka has not had the opportunity to establish his own identity. And even, in the stinking Utah Rose Bowl, it's like Jackson goes nuts when Chris and Garrett sit out, and Marvin goes nuts. And Emeka has a fine game, but he doesn't go nuts. And then we're off to the races. And Emeka has a 1,000-yard season last year, and it gets lost a little bit. So I do think in the end, the thing that we're doing is, by the end, we talked about Jackson, Chris, and Garrett as a trio. And we talked about Garrett and Chris as a duo a lot. And I don't think, at least the way we talk about it, and if people are underrating or overshadowed, like we're part of that. We talk about Ohio State football as much as anybody in the country. We probably don't talk about Emeka Egbuka enough. Because, Stephen, I don't think we say Marvin Emeka, Marvin Emeka, Marvin Emeka. We say Marv. So maybe we should say Marvin Emeka a little more often. Maybe the texter is making a very, very good point here.
Yeah, and I think we might, as like I said, out of sight, out of mind is some of this stuff. I think you made a very good point that it's that 21 group, they all got to have their moment without the other one being in the way, because their sophomore year got to be their individual breakouts. Like Chris Olave had 12 touchdown catches as a sophomore. Now, it didn't end right because of what happened in the Fiesta Bowl, but he got to have that breakout moment. Garrett, and it started with the Michigan game the year before that. Garrett kind of the same way. It started with the Michigan game. He was flashing, and then 2020, it's like, oh, Garrett's really, really good. And then Jackson Smith-Njigba, as a sophomore, got to have his moment, kind of regardless of what Garrett and Chris were doing. Then when one of those guys was gone, or when both of those guys was gone, he got to take that to another level. Emeka's sophomore breakout season was also with a generational talent. So and I think we're going to start seeing that more often, because Garrett's the 5-star receiver in the 2019 class. Chris Olave ends up being the only really good receiver in that 2018 class. So far, Jackson Smith-Njigba was the only first rounder from that 2020 group that we heralded so much. Now we'll see with Julian if he ends up being maybe a second rounder or something like that. But Jackson is clearly the dude who was a 5-star recruit and ended up being a 5-star player. We haven't seen yet. Marvin wasn't a 5-star player, but 5-star name. Two guys who were like 5-star level recruits end up being 5-star level players, and we're going to start seeing that more. Maybe you see it again with this 2023 group with Carnell Tate, who's already flashing, Brandon Ennis once he gets going and gets on campus, Jeremiah Smith and Mylan Graham as they get here. You're going to see it's going to be harder for maybe one to stand out as much as we've seen in the past, unless you're like Marvin Harrison Jr., generational talent. Maybe he should be the number one pick in the NFL draft type stuff.
All right. And plus, Emeka is a fine fella, lovely guy, great
Very
to talk
smart.
to, super smart, just kind of everything that you want. So, yeah, we're not in a hurry to trade Emeka Egbuka away. It's just you trade from strength and address weakness, and if you get 2 tackles for Emeka Egbuka, you make the deal. Okay, let's talk about Kliff Kingsbury. Why wouldn't you? It's Will from San Diego from the 607 with the Kliff Kingsbury hire, and again, I've been holding on to these a little bit. It's not like someone's only sending us a Kliff Kingsbury text now. It's been sitting there. So he was hired a little bit ago by USC. With Kliff Kingsbury being hired at USC as an offensive analyst, what is the perceived potential impact this may have on the Big Ten, and more specifically, Ohio State's goal of being QBU? It seems as though Lincoln Riley is taking day-like steps in a move to be more of a CEO. So I think, Nathan, these are just some dudes hanging out in LA giving each other jobs because Kliff Kingsbury wants something to do while he sits by his pool and collects checks from the Arizona Cardinals. I think, and he's not even a full-time assistant. So, and I think this is a little bit like Urban Meyer and Greg Schiano. They're friends. They have a relationship. A guy gets fired as an NFL head coach. You get paid. So usually how this stuff works is you get paid by the place that fired you, but you also have to try to get a job, or they're like, hey, we're paying you. Like, you have to do some stuff. So if you now Greg Schiano came and was the defensive coordinator, but it was like, oh, what does this mean for the future of Ohio State? It just means that Greg Schiano is going to tread water at Ohio State until he can get another head coaching job. So Kliff Kingsbury doesn't want to tread water in Columbus. He wants to tread water, where they have nightclubs. I don't know. What else do you do in LA? Go to a Dodgers game?
They don't have
Maybe
water.
he wants to
in
go
LA.
to Venice Beach.
I thought you were going to say he wanted to tread water where there was water. Yeah, he wants to go to the beach.
Oh, yeah. No, you can tread water in the Olentangy River if you need to, if you really need to. But no, he wants to tread it in the Pacific Ocean. So what do you make of this, Nathan? What do you make of Kliff to LA?
No, I'm kind of the same mind as you on this, that it's sort of just a temporary stop for him. And I don't know if under the same circumstances that this is the kind of hire that Ryan Day would make. They've done things like this for their analyst positions before, but only for those analyst positions where it's a very temporary stop. As far as like bringing someone like this on as a true assistant, as like bringing someone else on as the quarterback's coach in a long-term way.
But he's not an assistant. He's not.
Yeah.
He's not.
Right.
He's not.
Right.
He's not.
Right.
He's an analyst. Yeah.
Right. But depending on how long he stays at USC, there could have some impact here. I mean, he's a guy who knows something about quarterbacks, obviously. He knows something about developing or being around NFL quarterbacks. So I don't discount that it's in this competition that is about to intensify between Ohio State and USC, who have in the past, sort of danced around some of the same quarterbacks and things like that, that this can't be another factor in it. I'm not convinced that it's someone who would be there long term. I think there's going to be by next year, some head coaching job that Kliff Kingsbury gets.
I think it's go ahead.
No, go ahead, Steven.
I think his impact is no different than what Todd Fitz is doing at Ohio State, except he just might not be there as long because he might have a coaching job 12 months from now. But Fitz is a very underrated part of what's going on at Ohio State with that quarterback development there, especially since Corey.
Not on this podcast. It's not.
Yeah,
not on
this podcast. Not on this podcast. Correct. But I think that dynamic of Ryan Day being a quarterback's coach by trade and being your head coach, having a young guy like Corey Dennis, who like the quarterbacks deal with on a day-to-day basis, but he's still the assistant coach, and so there's a relatability there. But having Fitz there, who, because he's not officially part of the 10 assistant coaching staff, there's some stuff he can do sometimes, especially in the film room with some of these guys. Like CJ Stroud will tell you, Kyle McCord will tell you, Devin Brown will tell you how valuable having that in the room to kind of at an unlimited level, how valuable that is to their growth and their development. And Kingsbury is just going to do that for Caleb Williams this year, and that'll probably be it because he'll probably have a job somewhere a year from now. While Todd Fitz might just be around for a while.
So he's not a head coach. He might be an offensive coordinator somewhere. I don't think Kliff's a head coach. Kliff, his name's Kliff with a K. He was 35-39 at Texas Tech. That included a 13-16 record with Patrick Mahomes. You went 13-16 in games that Patrick Mahomes started. 13-16 with Patrick Mahomes. And he got fired. And the Arizona Cardinals were like, yeah, no, let's do that. 28-37-1 in Arizona. And just made Kyler Murray mad. Never won a playoff game. Patrick Mahomes.
They really hired him because Mahomes. Yeah, they really hired him because Mahomes won an MVP.
13-16.
I know.
This guy, Patrick Mahomes, is he the best quarterback in NFL history? Who was his college coach? Did he have a losing record with him? Let's hire him. So Kliff,
but you've seen these retreads. Like it keeps happening. Like I totally see him being like the next Fresno State coach or something. You know what I mean? Like.
Oh! I thought you meant NFL. No, college coach. No. I agree.
Sure.
I agree. I think NFL offensive coordinator or college coach. No, I think you're right. No, you're right. So the thing that I think, so he's going to do game planning, film work, be in the quarterback meeting rooms. The texts are asking here, does this mean Lincoln Riley is becoming more CEO? As has been mentioned, as we've noted, Lincoln Riley does not have a quarterbacks coach. Mm-hmm. So to bring in Kliff, to bring in poolside Kliff to kind of be in the quarterback meeting room is not a philosophical change. He's just giving his friend a job to make sure that the Cardinals give him the money he's owed. This was a guy sitting here. Again, he was the USC offensive coordinator pre-Lincoln Riley for a week. After he got fired by Texas Tech, he got hired as USC's offensive coordinator in December of 2018. He was hired as Arizona's head coach, the Arizona Cardinals, on January 8th. He lasted like a month. So don't read anything into this in terms of like, is Lincoln? I think Lincoln Riley is not where Ryan Day is, which is, again, it's like I think we have to give Ryan Day credit for this, because Lincoln Riley's like, what? No, I'm bringing my friend and we're going to hang out in the quarterback room all day. I don't know. Alex Grinch can do whatever he wants to. And Ryan Day's like, I'm not going to call plays anymore. I'll talk to the defensive players. And it's not like Lincoln Riley's like, I don't even know who our defensive players are. Alex Grinch brought in this guy from Georgia. What's his name? Grizzly Alexander? I don't know. Whatever it is. It's fine. It'll be fine. Yeah. He's from Georgia. Kirby Smart coached him up. He's ready to roll. We're fine. Our defense kept us from making the playoff last year, but it's fine. Alex Grinch, he's fun to hang out with. It's fine. I'm Lincoln Riley. I'm coaching quarterbacks. Ryan Day is gritting his teeth and making himself not be Lincoln Riley. Lincoln Riley's still being Lincoln Riley. But the only thing that'll tell me anything is if Dylan Raiola goes to USC. So I think this is your like, whoa, what is this? What's the cause and effect here? It's like, I don't know. USC was in on Dylan Raiola, and then they hired Kliff, and Kliff was like, let me tell you about the 13 wins I had with Patrick Mahomes. And Dylan Raiola's like, weren't there 16 losses too? And he's like, let me tell you about the 13 wins I had with Patrick Mahomes. Patrick and I, because guess what? Everyone says Dylan Raiola is the next Patrick Mahomes. But the other day on Twitter, Patrick Mahomes, after Trae Young absolutely stuck a knife through the Boston Celtics with a 35-footer, Patrick Mahomes tweeted like an icy cold emoji at Trae Young, and Dylan Raiola retweeted it. And I was like, oh, he's going to Georgia because that's in Atlanta. So I don't know where Dylan Raiola's going, but I think this is more perception than anything. It's his friend, right? It's Kliff and Lincoln hanging out in a cool city. More than anything, but perception matters in recruiting. Now, does Kliff know quarterback play? Yeah, he does, absolutely. But Lincoln Riley already knows that. So I don't know, but Steven, that's what I'm on alert for. Does somehow this move the needle with any big-time quarterback recruits who are like, oh, man, now it's Lincoln and Kliff. Let's roll.
First and foremost, I thought that was a yoga-level stretch of how you got from Trae Young to Dylan Raiola's going to Georgia. But kudos to that. Kudos to that. Yeah, same. Well, I mean, Kliff Kingsbury's coming from Arizona, Dylan Raiola lives in Arizona, so another stretch there. But, yeah, that would be the only way. If somehow Kliff Kingsbury ends up being an analyst here for like 2 years, and it gets – whether it's Dylan Raiola or Julian Newman in the 26 class or on down the line, they get some top-tier quarterback to sign up. And when somebody asks them why, it's, well, because Lincoln Riley already is a quarterback developer and he brought in Kliff Kingsbury as well, then it's something to pay attention to. But we're a long way from that, because of what we've already been discussing, but it would make things interesting, because then how does that impact the way Ryan Day goes about filling those analyst spots going forward when these guys in the NFL get fired?
So, yeah, Todd Fitch is Kliff Kingsbury. It's just you don't know about him because I don't know if he has a pool. All right, let's talk portal stuff. Again, this is an old one, Nathan. Over under on Ohio State portal transfers by position. This texter from the 303 set receiver at 2.5 and offensive line at 2.5. It's Ryan in Denver. And I thought it was interesting because we're at 1 at each of those positions so far, right? With Ben Chrisman and Caleb Burton. Are you taking over or under on 2.5 at both those positions, Nathan?
I would go over on one and under on the other. I would go over 2.5 on offensive line. I would go under 2.5 on receiver. Because receiver, you have a situation where the top 4 spots in that room potentially are cleared out after this year, after 2023. And then it starts just a huge competition for snaps in 2024 for 3 spots, for 4 spots, for 6 spots, however many they decide to use. So that's got to be, I think, very intriguing. If you've already been on the field, like there are guys who played enough as true freshmen that they didn't redshirt last year out of last year's receiver class. So there's guys who are already getting on the field from that group. It didn't surprise me that Caleb Burton left. He was the one who had, just because of other circumstances and getting hurt this spring, like it just wasn't coming together for him. But almost everybody else in that room probably could look at this right now and say, yeah, I mean, I know I'm going to be developing for another year behind as we already talked about, the best receivers in the country. But next year, I've got a shot. Next year, the door's wide open. I just have to go take that opportunity. But offensive line, it's a different circumstance, because right in receiver room, you're talking about young guys who are trying to project out into the future. In the offensive line room, you've still got some older guys going into their fourth years who just aren't getting any depth chart traction, and those are the guys who tend to move.
Would you agree with that, Stephen? Under on the receivers, over on the offensive linemen?
Yeah, I think the receiver that we thought maybe if one was going to leave, he left already. And now the rest of that class is kind of on this plan anyway for third year. They're going to Jaden Ballard plan, or like come up for air in third year and let's see where we're at. Well, to be honest with you, we don't want to name names and stuff like that, but I'm kind of shocked they already aren't over 2.5 transfers from that offensive line room. Now, obviously the portal didn't close till Sunday, but I think we all in the back of our heads probably have some names of guys that would be candidates to have already entered the portal at this point. So, yeah, I agree.
So we'll come back and see if we hit the number. I agree. I would agree with both you guys on that. I see you with your offensive line recruiting questions. I see you with your confidence about the offensive line, scheme questions with the offensive line. I had them lined up. We just did a run game podcast. I'm going to save them. I'm going to save all the offensive line stuff for next week. We can revisit that again. I think maybe what's going to happen is the portal's going to shake some stuff loose here, maybe both ways, and we can reset on the offensive line. And we just did a run game podcast, but the run game podcast was really about the running backs more so. We can reset the offensive line, potential depth chart, all this kind of stuff, where they are, where they're headed, and we'll save that. And Nathan, can we tease an interesting conversation that you sent to the texters? And I know you're writing, but I'm going to imagine you got some draft stuff, but you had some big picture discussions with Stud. Tell the people.
Yeah. So Greg Studrawa, I tracked him down. He is retired now, living in Florida. And, a lot of people who retire, they decide to travel, and his travel is mostly just bouncing around to NFL games all football season, watching former Ohio State players or players he coached elsewhere, but a lot of Ohio State guys. He went and saw Thayer Munford a bunch last year, and I thought he was just an intriguing guy because of this juncture that we're at Ohio State right now, where unquestionably, like, he went and recruited Paris Johnson and DeJuan Jones and Luke Whippler, and all three of those guys, one's going to be a first rounder, one could be a first rounder, one's going to maybe be a day two guy. Like, it's going to be a big deal for Ohio State's offensive line this week. And then there's also unquestionably what's going on at Ohio State right now, and a lot of it traces back to things that didn't happen while he was there, things that fell short in the recruiting sphere, and he didn't really shy away from that. I asked him, what it's like to still, kind of have that hanging, and he's like, yeah, that's part of the business. Didn't really get it done there, and you just kind of have to, try your best and be willing to live with the consequences, and that's I not much else you can say really about that. But he's just an intriguing figure to me, and he had a lot of good things to say, obviously, about the guys who are going to be moving on and the way that they came along in their careers. How surprised he was that Luke Whippler got this done in 3 years, saying that going into that sophomore year, he was like, oh, I really see him coming. Thankfully, he's got some time to like really develop. And then Harry Miller's situation arose, and they were like, well, here you go. It's time now. And then 2 years later, he's going off to the NFL. So sometimes those things happen quickly. With DeJuan Jones, it took a little longer, but it was always what he thought could happen if the application of his willingness and diligence ever snapped in. And when it did, things really took off. So he has a good perspective on everything that's going on in the Ohio State offensive line room, because he was the architect of a lot of what is still going on, the last years of what is still going on in this room. So this transition happens into the future, and people can make their own judgments off of I guess what he had to say about it.
So that will be in a story appearing Thursday on cleveland.com?
That'll be Thursday morning. Yep.
Okay. Greg Studrawa talking about these guys in the draft. All right. That means we're not going to talk offensive line now, but we have a couple more things we are going to talk about, including Air Noland and the joy of lower expectations. Buckeye Talk. We'll be back right after this. All right, last few from our texters. Love the texters. Busy with work and normal life. Son is at Ohio State. Thanks for the updates. It's from the 908. Great. You're welcome. Do any of the fans have football fever yet? I'm back to regular work like COVID never happened, so am I the only one who loves Buckeye football, but I'm waiting until August to get excited? This is interesting to me. I almost feel like this could be a thing to survey of, like, when does your fever kick in, or how do you rate it? I like spring football, and I like uncertainty in spring football because it's like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen. What's going to happen with the offensive line? What's going to happen with quarterback? What's going to happen with the secondary, right? I think that's fun. I don't know, though, Nathan. Like, should Ohio State fans have football fever yet? Or is it like, Ohio State was good. They will be good. I'm a little mad about the Michigan thing. I was a little encouraged maybe by the Georgia loss. We'll see what happens, but get back to me in August. I'm going to go live my life.
I guess I could see having football fever like right after the spring game, because unlike us, they didn't get to go watch, multiple practices and have this be a part of their like daily life in the same way for those 6 weeks leading up to the spring game. So finally there's like this kind of background anticipation, and all of a sudden you get to watch football again. And now you're like, wait, that's it? Like no more football for 5 months? I could see that being a tough thing to deal with. So I guess my suggestion is go watch some old games, go listen to some old Buckeye Talks, or just keep listening to the new ones that we keep pumping out, because God knows we're going to be talking about a lot of football between now and August.
I will say, and I said it at the time, I didn't think the Ohio State spring game crackled like it has some years. And as much as uncertainty is interesting, again, I've been watching a bunch of the spring games for the College Football Survivor Show. I thought Florida State looked great in the spring. I thought Washington looked good in the spring. And Washington's out there chucking it around. Michael Penix is out there all game throwing to first-team receivers. Marvin barely played. Emeka was hurt, and Julian was hurt. You did not get to see what Ohio State does best. So sometimes, Stephen, Florida State was throwing it around. Jordan Travis, they had this guy, Kelvin Portier, I get the first name wrong, who's making one-handed catches. There were just some explosive plays where you can find, again, it's the teams that have veteran quarterbacks put on some shows. And if I was a Washington fan or an LSU fan or a Florida State fan, I would be like, I cannot wait for September, because I think my team has a chance to be as good as it has been in a while, right? Ohio State's always good. Ohio State's always a national contender. And this wasn't the circus on display, Stephen. Like the spring game did not remind people of how explosive and spectacular Ohio State can be, mostly by choice, a little bit by quarterback competition and youth. So I think maybe the fever isn't as high as it might be in years where, holy moly, Dwayne Haskins and Joe Burrow were out there going head-to-head. They both look good. What's going to happen? I'm excited for this passing game. Maybe there was more fever 5 years ago in 2018.
There's no fireworks. Now, Devin not playing hurt that a lot. But also, because Ohio State's good every year, I don't know if, at least if I were a fan coming to Ohio State spring game, I would not be coming to watch the superstars, because especially now and how Day handles it, because the superstars are not going to play. They're going to play a series, get some sweat going, and they're going to be standing around the rest of the day. I would be coming to see who might be next. And my first spring game was 2019, and we had discussions about what Garrett could be, and then he did some stuff in the spring game that was like, whoa, that's going to be cool in 3 years, and it ended up being cool in 3 years. Or you'll get like the DeMario McCall will have his MVP of the spring game. Even last spring, Evan Pryor kind of showed some things. And the spring is supposed to help build anticipation for things, and I don't feel like this spring game had that. Even with the Carnell Tate touchdown catch, it wasn't flashy. It was just a good execution on that play, and it just kind of put a bookend on a guy who had a pretty good spring. But it was nothing that made you. It wasn't Garrett Wilson level. I think that's going to be my meter from now on. There wasn't that. Like, who would? I don't know who I would say were the MVPs of the spring game. It was just kind of they showed up. The offensive line has issues. The defensive line might be really good. Sonny Styles and C.J. Hicks are 5-star recruits, but we're not even sure if they're starters or not. In fact, one of them we're pretty sure he's not a starter. We're not even sure how much he's going to play this year. So it was just kind of hard to ramp that up. in a situation where we're building anticipation that you didn't have to sit on for the next 4 months because the season's not here yet. So you might get excited about something, but you got to bottle that up because we're not even sure how real some of it is yet until they get out there for fall camp.
More of a slow boil sometimes with Ohio State. You don't have to have a fever because they're just they're always hot. So you don't have to take your temperature.
It's a bar.
Let's do an Air Noland thing. From the 4-4-0, I know you guys talked a little bit about Air Noland being a left-handed quarterback, but how do you think that could impact recruiting at tackle, and what is the history of lefty quarterbacks at Ohio State and under Ryan Day? I don't think there is a history. I don't know this for sure. Do you know this? Has Ohio State ever had a left-handed quarterback? I don't know. And if there are people screaming at their phones right now, I apologize. There certainly is not one in my head that I can conjure and grab.
There is one, and it was about 25 years ago. Give me 30 seconds here. I had the name, and then I lost the name.
So what are you looking up? Left-handed Ohio State quarterbacks.com?
Yeah.
What is this?
No. I wrote about it when he actually committed. Now I got to find it again. There was one.
So I'll talk about some other left-handed quarterbacks that have been around, right?
Yeah.
Matt Leinart at USC, what a Heisman, being left-handed. Tua Tagovailoa was left-handed. Was Tim Tebow left-handed? Tim Tebow was left-handed, right?
Tim Tebow.
So we've seen guys do it.
Cade McNown.
Mike Vick, oh yeah.
Todd Marinovich, Steve Young, and Terry Baker. Those are the lefty quarterbacks who have gone on to be first-round draft picks. And Vick, Marinovich, Steve Young, and Terry Baker were the ones who were Marinovich, thank you, were the number one picks in their respective NFL drafts.
Okay. So the issue is the tackle thing here, right? And so I was researching some stuff on this. There are some, and this was more at the NFL level, but they were saying, when Matt Leinart got drafted by the Arizona Cardinals, they drafted then after him, the next year, a college left tackle and put him at right tackle, and it didn't go very well. And the Broncos, when they had Tim Tebow, drafted a college left tackle in the second round and put him at right tackle, and it didn't go that well. And I know because of the Browns, Jedrick Wills, who was drafted by the Browns, was a right tackle at Alabama, even though he was their best tackle. I think he was the right tackle when Jalen Hurts was the starting quarterback, and then he stayed at right tackle when Tua Tagovailoa became the starting quarterback, when maybe he would have made the more natural transition for, hey, you get older. The Mike Rodak at AL.com was talking at Bama, that's just a normal thing. It's guard, right tackle, left tackle. Guard, right tackle, left tackle. That's just what they do. It's been a little bit of a surprise, I guess, at Alabama that J.C. Latham, who was that 5-star recruit that Ohio State wanted a couple years ago, was at right tackle last year and feels like he's going to stay at right tackle for the moment. Bama had some left tackle problems in their spring game, though. Caden Proctor might wind up at their left tackle. So anyway, you might wind up putting your best tackle at right tackle. That just might be the thing that happens. That in the future, if Air Noland's the quarterback and you have a Paris Johnson type, you might put him at right tackle instead of left. And then that was a little bit of an issue for Jedrick Wills because the Browns drafted him number 10 overall. Well, if you're going to take a tackle there, you're really thinking left tackle, right? And then he got to the league, and then he had to transition from right tackle to left tackle, even though he'd never really played left tackle before. But it wasn't that he wasn't good enough to be the left tackle. It's that he had a left-handed quarterback. So, Nathan, I don't think it really means anything other than teams have done it, that it's really about having your best tackle, as people know this, on the quarterback's blind side. So that might mean that Ohio State's best tackle, if and when Air Noland is the starter, will play right tackle instead of left, and that may have some minor effect on their futures as a pro, but I don't think it affects anything in recruiting or development or how you go about it. You just have to be aware of that.
Yeah, first of all, I should say I spent most of this conversation trying to remember if Johnny Utah, the fictional Ohio State quarterback from Point Break, was left-handed. I think he was, Keanu Reeves, so that would be one. That might be the only one in Ohio State history for people who might remember that film from the early 90s. What I think is interesting about it, though, is when they get to the competition stage. So let's say it's a spring like this where you have two quarterbacks who are kind of going head-to-head to decide who's going to be the starter. If you're making a decision long-term about moving your tackles, how are you handling that as guys are splitting first-team reps? We saw a lot of drills this spring, a lot of different periods this spring where it's the same offensive line. All the personnel is the same except for the fact that on the first 3 reps, it's Kyle McCord, and the next 3 reps, it's Devin Brown, or vice versa. So are you flipping guys around from tackle to tackle as you're doing that? Or do you worry about evaluating the quarterback first and then make a decision about offensive tackle, and then maybe you don't really start to work on that until the fall? I don't know. That's the one thing that is kind of lingering for me, is because there are repercussions, so how do you handle kind of the chain result, the chain reaction of events there?
First and foremost, Steve Belisari was the last left-handed.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
It's the last one.
That's slightly before me. Okay. Yeah. People were screaming at their phones over that one. Okay. So the idea of this, like, working out, I just, like, you can't not recruit a quarterback, Steven, just because he's left-handed, right? But you felt like there maybe was a little bit of hesitation for Ohio State, but in the end, you got to go with talent.
Yeah, and there are people around Air Noland who felt like Ohio State wasn't the only team that was like that, just because it is a little different. You know, the mechanics are different, the steps and the footwork are a little bit different, and if you're not left-handed, it's kind of hard to teach that sometimes, so that maybe slowed the trigger a little bit. Now, a lot of what Air Noland was Ohio State was they wanted to see if he was serious by getting him up there, but that was a part of the factor of why some teams were a little late to the punch with Air Noland, which is why I'm a little interested to see how his summer goes, because he's already creeping up the ranking, and some of that is the Ohio State commitment, but he's up to 66 when he was in the 80s when he committed, and I'm wondering if that guy gets to Elite 11 and starts pushing for 5-star status, but we'll see with that stuff. But yes, Ohio State hasn't done this in a while, and it'd be an interesting thing to add to its resume of, hey, we develop first-round Heisman Trophy level quarterbacks here, and it doesn't matter what hand it is, because Alabama already can say that. But it is going to be a different – it'll be interesting asking Ryan Day about left-handed quarterbacks on signing day of, hey, have you ever developed a left-handed quarterback? How is it different? And then now, if this guy ends up being your starting quarterback, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, in terms of how you build the roster around him to, as you're talking about, now the blind side is the right side, so you do have to do some things differently, and whether that means you have to scheme up certain plays differently as well.
I am really interested in how a quarterback coach looks at left-handed QBs, because I remember it looks so awkward to me when I watch football. Whenever a left-handed quarterback is playing, like, I don't care who it is, Steve Young, it looks weird to me. But I remember seeing last year a video clip, someone had just taken Tua's film and like flipped it, so he was throwing right-handed and it looked completely normal. So I'm really curious how Ryan Day and Corey Dennis would look at a left-handed quarterback. Do they see past the awkwardness and just see the fundamentals, the skills that are there, and it looks the same to them, just from a different release point?
Air has, because we've talked about this extensively now. It's not that the receivers he's played with, Jeremy, he's playing with top receivers in the country, and the ball just spins differently. So from a receiver standpoint, it's not that hard to adjust to it if you just spend an offseason throwing, which you would do anyway. So it is probably more from a coaching and scheme standpoint where, I don't know, it might drive Ryan Day ahead, and Brian Hartline fits for 2 weeks as they're trying to figure this out. But once it gets going, as we saw with Tua, it can work out pretty well. It just will look weird to all of us.
It's like having an Australian punter. The ball spins opposite, right? So you figure it out. The Alabama put in –
that's toilets, not punters.
Same thing. Alabama put in a left-handed quarterback at halftime in the national championship game and won. So it was fine. They adjusted. Okay, 2 more questions here. This is a fascinating one because I have a definitive answer to this. I think about this kind of stuff. From the 216, do you ever look at the list of recruits and see someone and think they really shouldn't have signed here for whatever reason? Their talent, Ohio State definitely recruiting over them next year, whatever. From the 216, 1,000%. It's not a thing you vocalize most of the time because these are young people who are making individual choices about their lives, and the opportunity to play football at a major college is something that they earn through sweat and grit and intelligence and hard work and skill. And to be like, I don't know why I came here. You're just going to get recruited over. It's not a thing you can, you could have said that to Darren Lee. It's like, what are you doing, Darren Lee? They're like, go. And you see how it works out. But I absolutely think this sometimes, Nathan, that like I don't know what a guy's doing. Best of luck to him. But, man, I would have taken the spot at a school that's more like the 30th best program in the country instead of top 5, where it felt like you were going to be a star. And I admire the guys who would say, nope, I'm going to the best program possible, whatever. But I thought it with Mayan Williams. Iowa State, that was a place where Breece Hall played, man. And Breece Hall was great at Iowa State. It was an early second-round pick, went to the NFL, was great with the Jets last year before he got hurt. And I thought, what are you doing? Stick with your Iowa State commitment. And if you look at Iowa State's leading rusher last year, again, like 400 yards. And I think Mayan Williams might be the workhorse back at Iowa State if he was there. But also, he came to Ohio State and ran people over and helped Ohio State make the playoff. And so, Mayan Williams has had a bigger role at Ohio State than I ever expected. But that was a guy that I thought, it's great. I know there's things pulling you here, but Iowa State was in on you early. They have good running backs there. You can develop there. You can go be the guy. Go be the guy. And I would say Mayan Williams has proven me wrong. Like, people in the building say Mayan Williams is going to be drafted. He's played a huge role at Ohio State. We think he's going to play a huge role on this team here. So that's an example, Nathan, where I thought it in the moment and I would have been wrong. I also thought it about Antonio Williams, who was committed to Wisconsin, got flipped by Ohio State late, came here, never got on the field, transferred to North Carolina, and like it never happened. And I just thought, man, you can go be the running back at Wisconsin. Like, you're Wisconsin's #1 running back recruit in your class. It's Wisconsin. Of all the things they don't do, they do this. They send running backs to New York for the Heisman ceremony. What are you doing? Why are you coming here to be the next guy in line to sit at Ohio State? And that one, I think, he's fine. He has a good relationship with Tony Alford. His life is, but I think he would have had more opportunity. And maybe his football career would have gone differently. So I absolutely think it, Nathan, at least one guy every class. I think, why did this guy choose to do this and come to Ohio State? What do you think about it?
Yeah, no, I would say at least that many per class. And it's why that when we start talking about guys who eventually transfer, a lot of times we're like, yeah, this makes sense. Like 2-3 years in, that this sometimes it's in-state guys, sometimes it's guys from farther away. And it's why it was such a proponent of allowing immediate eligibility after transfers, because, and this crystallized for me more when I was covering basketball. There was one specific player that I thought a team reached on and took for weird reasons, and then a year later he's transferring, but a year later he has to sit out a year. This is before the portal, before the one-time transfer allowance. He has to sit out a year while the team he's leaving gets his scholarship back immediately, gets to go recruit. It's like, in the past, coaches had to pay, the players had to pay 100% of the penalty for a mistake, if you want to use that term, that was as much the coach's fault as anyone's. So I'm glad that players now have a little bit more flexibility to not have to pay that year-long penalty just because something wasn't the fit that they thought it was going to be when they signed up when they were 18.
Does this cross your mind, Stephen, or are you more of the idea of like, hey, man, if Ohio State wants you and you can come to Ohio State, come take your shot?
No, I think about 2 or 3 guys every single year. I think about it from that perspective, and I also think about it with guys who just get offered sometimes, and I go like, I don't see it. I'm not seeing why he got one. But I more see it with as far as players making decisions to come here. I more don't get it with guys who are not from Ohio, because I'll always. You brought up Mayan Williams. I get it, man. You're from Ohio. I get it. You grew up probably rooting for the Buckeyes. I get it. Mark Nave. I get it. The Armstrong twins. I get it. But when you're from Michigan or Virginia and Georgia, all these other, and don't really have ties here, then I don't get it as much, because then it's the example of you could probably go anywhere else and play and not be as far away from home in order to do this. But yeah, I think every single year, and I think we do a good job of letting people know who we're talking about, but we just do it in a nice political way most of the time.
So here's the opposite example of this, and Nathan, you would know this very well. Rondale Moore was committed to Texas, decommits, is back on the market, right? And Ohio State was interested. This was like Ohio State's, this is like Urban era still. Like they really want slot receivers. And I think they came after him hard late. And he could have decided to be a Buckeye. And instead he goes to Purdue, right? And is like, oh, what happens at Purdue? It's like he's the whole offense immediately because he walks into West Lafayette and everybody in West Lafayette says, we've never seen someone like you before. And at Ohio State, they would have said, get in the back of the room. Welcome. There's 6 guys just like you here. Meet Jalen Gill. You know, like it's just so that idea, like that's what makes me think, are there guys who came to Ohio State who, if they would have just said, no, you know what, I'm just going to go be the best guy somewhere else. Rondale Moore is like the perfect example to me because Ohio State was hot after him late. And there's part of you that's like, what? They couldn't get him, but it worked perfectly. He was a star. He was a high NFL draft pick. And how could it have gone any better at Ohio State for him? It might have gone as well. He might have earned the spot. We saw how good he was. But how could it have gone better? Right? So that's the guy I think of when it does happen, when a guy says no to Ohio State. You know, there's another guy who said no to Ohio State that Urban Meyer really wanted. Stephon Diggs said no. It's like, oh, whatever happened to Stephon Diggs? It's like, I don't know. He's a gazillionaire who's a number 1 receiver for one of the best teams in the NFL out of Maryland. Like it worked out. Who knows? Who knows? Maybe it would have happened at Ohio State, but maybe not. Because maybe you would have gotten here and been like, oh, here's Jalen Marshall and Michael Thomas and Evan Spencer and all these other guys. Oh, Urban, by the way, says you better be able to block. You're not going to play. See, now we're back around to receiver blocking. So, Nathan, but Rondale Moore is the guy in my head that sticks. Of like sometimes it's better to understand your situations.
Yeah, and he's a special case. So, like, I mean, I don't know if people didn't see that, and Ohio State fans saw it firsthand, but like that was pretty special what he was that first year before he got hurt, and he's never really been able to get it back. But I also thought that this was something that would get a little bit equated by the transfer portal, and I don't know that that's really happened yet, because you would have thought these guys who took that shot and then maybe couldn't crack through and got a little bit buried, but then they would move on. And I'm just going by the guys who left Ohio State. I mean, yes, Jamison Williams, that definitely happened. That's the one where it has happened. But this long list of guys who left Ohio State just since I've been here and went somewhere else, and they got playing time other places usually, but it's not like they became like real stars. You mentioned Jalen Gill before, who went to Boston College. He went back in the portal, I think, this spring. So it's like I thought maybe that the portal would be the thing that would eventually those guys would just maybe Rondale Moore had come here, got buried behind KJ Hill or whatever, and decided then he was going to go to Purdue and stepped right in right away and played. But we're not seeing a lot of other examples of that.
Is Sam Wiggs the second most productive transfer Ohio State's had of the Ryan Day era?
Behind Jamison Williams. Yeah, maybe we should make an all transfer team from Ohio State. We haven't lost a ton of guys, but if
you don't count Joe Burrow.
Well, I said the Day era. Joe Burrow was not under Ryan Day head coach. Yeah, just his QB coach.
I'm reading a story here. Rondale Moore, a 4-star recruit committed to Texas, was at his uncle's wedding last year when he answered his cell phone. It was Urban Meyer. Ohio State was interested. He told me about Ohio State and the opportunity I would have there, Moore said. We talked about that I had a place there if I wanted to call it home. You know who wrote that story? Me, which I forgot. And I just was Googling Rondale Moore in Ohio State, and I was like, oh, I wrote about this. So, yeah, it happens. Okay, last thing. This is about low expectations. This is more a life question, but I like life questions that's related to football from the 260. It's Jordan, the car rental guy here. This is more of a question from a fan perspective. I have a coworker of mine who's an Iowa fan. We were talking a few weeks back, and I asked him what it's like to be a fan of a team that doesn't have high expectations, not trying to sound rude. I was just genuinely curious if liking a team with lower expectations is more enjoyable and less stressful than watching a team that you expect to be a national championship contender every year. Obviously, the reward is higher with being an Ohio State fan, but sometimes I wonder what it would be like for my mental health if that wasn't the expectation every year. So bottom line is I think there's more paths to happiness. Because really, right, is there not are there multiple paths to true happiness as an Ohio State fan? Multiple? Are there multiple? Or is there kind of only one? And I guess, so one's the national championship. I guess the other one is good season, beat Michigan, maybe understand that you're a shade short of a national championship caliber team, and then go kick somebody's butt in a bowl game? Like, is that the next thing? Because even when they lose in the playoff, people are mad sometimes. Like, how many ways are there for Ohio State fans, Stephen, to really be happy when the expectations are this high?
Is an Ohio State fan ever really happy? I think is how I would approach this. Because here's why. Let's just take Gay's tenure so far, because we've got a good little sample size. Would you say fans were happy at the end of that 2019 season? Mainly because of how it ended?
No.
Right.
No, they feel like a missed opportunity that they blew in the semifinal.
Right. Clearly, they haven't been happy the last 2 years because you lost to Michigan. And, so that's what it is. And then maybe 2020, you're happy because it's like, dude, we made it to the national championship game and half our roster was sitting at home in isolation. So maybe then, but that didn't feel like happiness. That felt like content. And then the years before that, it's like, are you really happy because Purdue ruined your season or Iowa ruined your season or your coaching staff couldn't get it together so you couldn't repeat as national champion? It's hard. When you're dealing with these level of expectations, I don't think beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Happiness is to each person. But it feels like when you're dealing with expectations to this level, most of the time the best you can be is content with how things ended. And I don't think that's bad. I just think that's reality when both the program and the fan base have made it abundantly clear that the expectation every year is beat Michigan, win the Big Ten championship, win the national championship in that order. And when that's what it is, you're dealing with content. Can you get to content? Because I think that's a decent year. If you're happy, you're singing Carmen, Ohio in Ohio Stadium and holding up a trophy.
So, Nathan, you have a good view on this, right? Were there more happy Purdue fans than there are Ohio State fans?
Well, I covered Purdue football when they didn't win any game. They won 8 games in 4 years or whatever, 9 games in 4 years. So no, they were not content then. There was apathy. And contentment as we get older in all stages of life, I think is kind of an underrated state, but I understand what Stephen is getting at here. I used to think my perspective on this changed in the last year. I was having a conversation with an Iowa fan of a friend of mine who about last year, about the nonsense that was going on last year with that offense and everything. And it was funny because they operate almost from a position of fear that like, well, we don't want to, we know this isn't good, but if Ferentz leaves, then what if we're even worse? What if we're like, his point was like, we could be like Purdue or something or Nebraska. And I'm like, well, I don't know if you want to be like you're not that far from the Purdue level, really. And, Nebraska, who knows what's coming here. So it's like, it's interesting because when you look at it from that standpoint, are those people really getting the full enjoyment also where it's like, well, yeah, this stinks, but I don't want to complain about it too much because it's at least a livable level of stink. It's not the true level of stink that's below us.
I think that fear is a very important factor because if you just said, hey, would you rather be a fan of a team that goes 9-3 every year? You're 9-3 every year. You have no expectations of 12-0, but you're 9-3. I think there could be real happiness in that, but it's hard to be 9-3 every year without fearing that you're going to go 3-9 if you screw something up. So that fear of sucking, Buckeye Talk, is something that I do think Ohio State fans don't have that fear. They haven't fallen off a cliff like since the end of Coop, and even that wasn't that bad. So this is just life, though, right? So if you know what are good, hamburgers are good. Hamburgers are good, but steak is better.
Yeah.
So if you just eat hamburgers and you never eat steak, you think to yourself, man, these are good hamburgers. And then you have a steak and you think, oh. And now if you eat steak every day, first of all, you don't want any more hamburgers. Second of all, you might be like, well, this steak isn't cooked exactly right. Well, this steak, the flavoring isn't right. And now you're sending back your steak. And it's like, you understand you could be eating hamburgers. You're eating steak every night. It's like, yeah, I know, but I'm used to steak. Now I want the steak to be perfect. So that's just life. But, so I do think this, if you were never exposed to something like Ohio State football, if you were never exposed to being a fan of the New York Yankees, you were never exposed to being a fan of the Los Angeles Lakers or the Boston Celtics, or a team where excellence is the norm and championships are the goal. If you've never been exposed to that, I think there are ways you can be a very happy sports fan with your team. Once you have a taste of that steak, and then it's like, no, we're going back to hamburgers now. Remember how good hamburgers were? You're like, nope, I want steak now. So sorry, Ohio State people, you've been born into steak.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, steak is better than hamburger. So my goal for the rest of my career covering sports, swear to God, is to make steak eaters happy and remind them that they're eating steak every night, and that maybe it's a little tough tonight. Maybe the sides aren't great. Maybe the server was a little weird, but you're still eating a steak. Enjoy the steak. I want people who are fans of great programs to be happy, because I don't want there, Stephen, to be one path to happiness. I want more than content. I want real happiness and the joys of success. And don't let one bad game take away from 11 great weekends. Don't let striving for a championship make it mean that you're miserable if you don't get there. It truly is an actual goal of mine. I don't have any other goals. I got nothing else. Stay alive and make fans of successful college football teams happy with their programs. That's it. I got 2 things left on my agenda. My kids are almost grown. My wife doesn't care what I do, Stephen. I'm dedicating my life to this. Can it be done? Or you never, it's just human nature. When you're striving for championships, it's hard to be happy if you don't get there.
I don't want to say it can't be done, because now this is your life work. I don't want to, discourage you. I believe you can do anything you put your mind to. I do think that it's hard to convince someone who is living at the top of the mountain how hard it is to climb the mountain if they never have to actually climb it. Let's just say while Nathan was covering Purdue, they had a year where they went 11-1, right? I don't know how that looks, but let's just say they did it. That's probably the greatest year that program's ever seen. And so whoever was in college at that time is going to remember that for the rest of their life. That year when Purdue went 11-1. I'll use my own example. My freshman year, my first year at Kent, we made a bowl game, and we were very close to getting to the Orange Bowl, but then we lost in the MAC championship. But we'll remember that forever, because that was awesome. Because the other times we weren't eating steak. We were eating McDonald's, and like the worst of the McDonald's at the end of the night when they're scraping stuff off the grill and all that stuff. But when you know what that climb is like, you never forget that climb. When you're always eating that steak and you've already had the best possible steak you can have and the best spot on the mountain you can have, the rest of your life is spent chasing that feeling again. And so you forget how hard it was to get to that spot in the first place. So it might take a legitimate fall off for Ohio State fans to really ever appreciate that ever again, because every other program has had that fall off, but Ohio State's never had it. So maybe you forget what that's like. So good luck to you on that task. I just don't see it happening unless Ohio State all of a sudden starts going 9-3 and 8-4 and 7-5.
I feel like there was a pretty good run.
Like there's only one happy team, like if you win the national championship, you're happy. Yeah. If you don't win it, then you're not. I don't like that. Go ahead, Nathan.
But I feel like there was a pretty good run where during the Bielema era and maybe some Barry Alvarez, where Wisconsin might have been about as close to like that happiness scale as you could get, because I think they expected great achievement within the Big Ten and accomplished it very regularly, but had like really no expectation or illusion that they should then also be this dominant national team. It was like they knew what their identity was. They were going to execute that. They were going to recruit to that the best they could. And partially because of how they could recruit, that's how they built their identity. And they would go out and win 10 games with it and be in the Big Ten championship game and win it sometimes and go to Rose Bowls. And that was, I think people were ecstatic about that, even though they were never a national championship contender, really, right? That was probably about as close to it, because they didn't really have some of the dips that they were. the highs were higher and the dips weren't as low as what Iowa has had. And you never got to a point where you had the national expectation that Ohio State carries every year.
Yeah, I'm very interested, like in happiness meters. Trying to gauge if you could send it out to all 131 teams or however many there are now and say, like, how happy are you? How happy are you with compared to what the expectations of your program are? Just how happy are you on a Saturday having fun with your team? Does it feel like the administration cares? Do they try? Is your coach smart? Does he try? Do you like the players? Does it feel like, the players and the fans connect to each other? Like all that kind of stuff. There's a happiness meter, but maybe I just do think it still matters a little bit more, as much as of a professional sport this is with the money and the TV and everything else. It is college kids. It is a connection. People just have a little bit of a more connection to their college if it's your alma mater, or if it's not your alma mater. That I just don't think college, if the NFL and the NBA are championship or bust, okay, so be it, they're millionaires. I just don't think college football should be championship or bust for anybody. That means Alabama, that means Georgia, that means Ohio State. And so I think we have to find happiness for everybody in a world where it has to be more than that. Okay. The draft is coming. Read cleveland.com/OSU for all the coverage of the draft on Thursday night, and then on Friday, and then on Saturday. It's 3 days of the draft. And we will have a Friday podcast reacting to the first round, and then we will have a Monday podcast reacting to rounds 2 through 7 that are happening on Friday and Saturday. And then early next week, we will have I think probably the Tuesday pod. We might finagle a little bit. We're going to have a sense, the portal's going to be closed, and we're really going to have a sense of what the options are for Ohio State and how this roster might be reshaped. So we won't know everybody that's coming, but we'll know everybody who's in the portal, potentially going out for Ohio State, and all the options that are in the portal potentially coming in to Ohio State. And we'll talk about that here at Buckeye Talk, and of course, write about it at cleveland.com/OSU. But for now, we appreciate you guys letting us be part of your Ohio State fandom. For Nathan Baird and for Stephen Means, I'm Doug Maurice, and that was Buckeye Talk.